Now, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, retired, is the CEO of Our Country, Our Choice. This is a new appointment of his. I'm going to be asking him about that. But he has another of these, like Mohammed Hijab, who had a level of prominence, perhaps in the Beltway, perhaps in some parts of the United States, but has now become a global figure, with people looking out for his analysis, his take on world events. There's nothing he doesn't know about war, about defense, about security, about terrorism. He was in the Pentagon. He was in the White House. He might well have become a United States ambassador. Personally, I have greater ambitions for him than that. He is, as I say, once upon a time a compatriot of mine with a name like Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Welcome, Colonel, to the mother of all talk shows. I'll talk about your new role in a minute, but as you survey the headlines of the top people's papers, hasn't quite filtered down to the news they give to the masses yet, but all the top people's papers, all the top people's fora, are all now preparing each other, and ultimately they'll have to prepare us, the public, for a cataclysmic Russian victory in Ukraine. You predicted this all along. Do you feel vindicated?
I'd feel better about it if this had ended earlier and fewer Ukrainians and Russians had lost their lives in what is really a pointless conflict that never needed to happen.
It's true, isn't it, that every death since the Ankara initialed draft peace agreement has, in a sense, been a death that our governments, yours and mine, bear responsibility for. Because this could all have been over when hundreds of thousands of people that are dead today would still have been alive.
Oh, absolutely. If anything, I would describe this as a Washington vanity project. Lots of people in Washington, supported by friends in London and some other European capitals, decided that they had an opportunity to destroy Russia and that they would use Ukraine for that purpose. And they'd been building up to this for many, many years, not just the 8 years before the war broke out, but actually even earlier, which helps to explain the coup that occurred and the installation of the Zelensky government later on. All of it was fantasy. It made no sense. All the underlying assumptions were wrong. And the usual suspects in the Department of Defense, all of your retired generals and active generals, very few of whom ever had any practical military experience and seldom, if ever, bothered to study their professions, all jumped on the bandwagon predicting imminent victory for Ukraine. And everyone lied prolifically and with great convincing rhetoric day after day that the Russians were awful, they were losing, they had no chance to win. They still haven't admitted the truth, which is we're looking at roughly 500,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers. This evening I heard a retired general say, well, perhaps 125,000. Well, that's a fraction of what we know has happened. And he's still trying to make the argument that if we just spend more money and send more equipment, Ukraine will triumph. In reality, the Russians are advancing deliberately but slowly. I think Mr. Putin is looking for a negotiating partner among the European states. He's not interested in marching to the Polish border. But as I keep telling everyone, if we're stupid enough to refuse to negotiate, if we won't bring this stupid and pointless war to an end, not only will we destroy the Ukrainian nation, but we'll end up moving Russian forces that much further towards the West, which I thought was the very thing we wanted to avoid, as well as the massive expansion of the Russian armed forces. They are now mammoth, very well staffed, brilliantly officered, well led, well equipped. This is not what we set out to achieve.
So does that make our leaders fools or knaves? Fools because they didn't see what you and I could see, or knaves because they could see it and did it anyway?
I think it's probably a little of both. I mean, we've always had a problem. You have in Great Britain and we in the United States with senior military and political leaders who tended to be persuaded by wishful thinking that things were true that were not. This is simply another example. And you add to that corruption and greed and arrogance. I think the arrogance in Washington is at an all-time high. One would think after the decades of failure, military and strategic and political, and given the state of our economy and the financial system, everyone would have developed some measure of humility. Nothing could be further from the truth. No one will admit the truth. Everyone insists on the lie, and the arrogance continues.
It's very disturbing and entirely true also on this side of the Atlantic. He had a bad Tuesday, Zelensky, in Washington, but one of our correspondents has just briefed us that he had a better Wednesday. He had all the brass out there to greet him, and Lloyd Austin booming 9 different pledges in 1 minute, 45 seconds. What happened?
Well, I think he thought that he had access to the Epstein tapes and he was going to present those to President Biden and his colleagues and tell them he was going to release them if they didn't support him. Doesn't seem to have worked. Maybe the tapes weren't good enough, didn't have enough people on them. I don't know. The generals are just waiting around to retire and pick up lucrative contracts with the defense industry. So they're performing not just for their political sponsors that advanced them to senior rank, they're performing for their future bosses and the shareholders, reassuring them that they can sell anything that they produce to anyone. Whether we win or lose doesn't make any difference. And apparently they've got a point. But I think this is going to be tough to conceal. The rest of the world knows what has happened, Mr. Galloway. And what has happened is very clear. Not only has this Western-trained Ukrainian force failed miserably for reasons that are not entirely its fault, but because of the way we trained it, organized it, and equipped it. In addition to that, our technology has failed miserably. Our advice has been appalling. I mean, if in retrospect, I'm surprised President Putin hasn't offered to reimburse London and Washington for the cost of sending all the retired generals over there to advise them, because they've been his greatest assets. It's been stupidity on stilts, an unwillingness to see how profoundly warfare has changed. A desire to see Russians as mediocre and subhuman. It's outrageous nonsense. It was never true. And now, as you know, I'm sure you're aware, we've poisoned the well with Russia for at least a decade or more. I can't imagine why the Russians would pay any attention to anything we say. Everything we've told them was a lie. Everything we've done has been aimed at subverting them and alienating them. And I think that's a serious mistake. I hope we can get a new generation of political leaders in there that can turn it around. But that's, in my judgment, the worst part. And the rest of the world now knows we're weak. And I think that weakness is going to be on display increasingly in the future. And I would include in that the Middle East. We are not the power we were 30 years ago. We're not even close.
Well, undoubtedly, and I was speaking earlier, I was in the UAE when President Putin arrived. You could see, you could feel, it's palpable, the extent to which the formerly, well, to say the least, friends and allies of the West have begun to reorientate towards the East. Insofar as we struggled mightily to lift a huge stone, we really have dropped it on our own feet, haven't we? Russia is stronger and richer. Russia is stronger and militarily more powerful. Its prestige has grown. Its armed forces now tried and tested. It's a thoroughgoing disaster, all this. And the leaders who led us into it really ought to pay a price if democracy means anything.
Well, you've got to get people informed. And this is something that's acutely lacking in the United States. If you ask most Americans, what are you doing tonight? They're looking for the latest football game. They're trying to find out who Taylor Swift is going to date next week. If you ask them about what's happening in the Middle East, they sort of shrug their shoulders. They're not terribly interested. They think this is a minor dust-up that will soon be over. as was the case in previous occasions with the Israelis and the Arabs. And, you know, Arabs have also been through the ringer as well here in the United States. It was easy to convince people that Russians were bad simply because of the Cold War. All you had to do was dust off the Cold War propaganda and throw it at them. Well, now you have the same problem, unfortunately, with Muslim Arabs. Oh, Muslim Arabs, we've been fighting them for years. The hell with them. Let's hope the Israelis do a great job. With no understanding of the situation, of the humanitarian dimension, and no real interest. This is all going to come back and harm us in the long run. But for the moment, strategically, it's not having any impact here. No, nothing is penetrating the American public.
You know far more about warfare than I, but when I look at the situation in the Gulf, in the Red Sea, it looks to me like the asymmetrical warfare in which the common man can inflict wholly disproportionate damage and cost on his enemy. The Houthis, for example, a ragged-assed army, a kind of Taliban on wheels, now have the ability to bring shipping in the Red Sea to a halt at a cost of uncountable billions of dollars for people having to sail their ships around a continent instead, or pay insurance at an exorbitant price because there's a pretty good chance the Houthis will stick a missile up your jumper if you sail past them. This is a remarkable turnaround, isn't it?
Well, the Houthis have actually practically shut down the Suez Canal for much of the commercial traffic. That's a tremendous achievement. We haven't had to have a collision or an explosion in the Suez, and people are now sailing all the way around the Cape to avoid going through the Red Sea. I'm waiting for someone in Washington to make the decision to commit 5,000 or 10,000 Marine infantry or something to land in Yemen. And, you know, based on the experience in Yemen that the British had, I can only imagine that would be a very unrewarding experience dealing with the Houthis and running around in the mountains down there. No one wants to talk to anybody. Again, you know, before you launch, why not talk to people? You know, one thing that the British always did very well before they went anywhere is that they asked this question: how do we practice economy of enemies? Who will work with us and who won't? And eventually, they narrowed it down to just a very small number of people who would oppose them. And they had help from others around them. That was Sir Richard Francis Burton, who was a genius at this sort of thing, the real James Bond of the 19th century. We don't have anybody thinking like that. We go in with a sledgehammer. We smash everything. We smash everybody. And then we wonder why nobody likes us and everybody wants us out. We have no friends today in Iraq. Nobody in Syria wants us except some of the Kurds. And it's not even all the Kurds. It's a minority of them. But we've managed to alienate the Iranians, the Turks, as well as all of the Arabs. So I think we're in for a long war. People think, well, you know, the Israelis will finish up in Gaza over the next few weeks. Well, finish up means expel or kill everybody who's left. Now they're going to pump some seawater into the tunnels. I'm sure that'll get rid of some of them, in addition to destroying the water table and making the place unlivable. But I see this as dragging on. I see things changing in the Muslim world. And there's this concept called asadiyya that goes back to Ibn Khaldun, the famous Muslim historiographer. And he talked about social cohesion and the impact of Islam on the peoples that lived within the Islamic world. And he said, you know, no one has ever seen the power of Islam, fully appreciates what it can do. Well, today the world is different. The people in this region are better educated, they have access to technology, and they know what's happening. Hundreds of millions of people, Turks, Arabs, Iranians, Egyptians, everyone knows what's happening. Anyone who thinks that this is going to end soon is wrong. I think this is the beginning of a very dangerous period. And frankly, I think the Israelis have grossly underestimated the impact of their actions. And at the same time, we don't seem to understand it. We're sitting out there on board our aircraft carriers waiting for the word to fly strikes. And we're trying very hard to split the Lebanese government from Hezbollah, cutting deals and agreements in the hopes that that will keep Hezbollah out. But in the long run, I don't see that happening. I think things are going to get worse, particularly in the spring. We may have a pause, a temporary ceasefire, but this is going to turn into a long, ugly war that none of us are going to like.
I know you're a patriotic American, and I swear I say this not to hurt your feelings at all, but as I watch the decline, steep and rapid, of your president, such that in his latest pronunciamento, he thrice declared that the events of October 7th were 65 years ago instead of 65 days ago, and that allowed him to have a walk-on part for his father, who died 20 years ago, returning to his kibbutz. This is not a well man. As we say in Scotland, you would not send that man out for a loaf, never mind to rule and govern the most powerful country in the world. Of how much more of this can the American people put?
Well, a lot of us have asked that question. I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind that Biden is not governing anything. And whatever he says, whatever he signs is put in front of him by other people. The other people are committed to two things. They're committed to the extension of this war in Ukraine. They're committed to unlimited spending. They're committed to backing whatever is required in the Middle East that Israel demands. And they control events. The American people, as I said, aren't paying a great deal of attention right now. But it will take something major to get their attention, something that hits them at home. Now, we've got problems here. Don't mistake that. We have open borders, rising criminality. Lots of Americans are saying, sure, we like the Israelis, but why are we sending all of this money to Israel and Ukraine when we have open borders, when we can't even maintain effective armed forces, when people won't join it? I mean, all this diversity, inclusion, and equity is killing us in the military. And we have so denigrated the role that men play, particularly white men, that the armed forces are suffering for that dramatically. You know, somebody once said, was complaining about the numbers of British soldiers, and Disraeli made the comment, no one complained about the numbers of British soldiers at Waterloo. Well, I like to point out that no one complained about the numbers of white men fighting in the armed forces at Okinawa or Midway or Normandy or anywhere else. But we're in a lot of trouble, Mr. Galloway. We've lost our way. We've lost our sense of purpose. We've lost our sense of identity. And all of these things are going to come out in the months ahead. And I hope that we can weather this and recover. But right now, we are admittedly in a lot of trouble, and we are not in a position to wage a major regional war. And no one should exclude that possibility. That could happen. There are a lot of people in Washington working closely with Jerusalem to spark a war with Iran. And that would be, in my judgment, both unnecessary and catastrophic. If that happens, anyone who thinks that Russia will stand by and watch us destroy Iran is crazy. And the Chinese at this point have enormous investments in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula. They depend heavily on the oil and gas. They don't want to see that shut down. So you're talking about the simple truth is this. No one in the region, in the Near East or Southwest Asia or Eastern Europe wants a war except us.
Chilling indeed. Tell us about your new role, Colonel, Our Country, Our Choice. What is that, and what do you hope to achieve?
Our Country, Our Choice was formed before I showed up by a group of people who simply decided it doesn't make any difference for whom we vote. We get the same bad policies. They've discovered that we have this thing called the Uniparty, where everyone has his hand out, everyone's enriching him or herself. And that's why you don't have debates. You have very few discussions. The fight is over money. It's not over anything of substance. And we're busy falling all over ourselves to ship money overseas, largely because it results in arms sales that enrich people, and no one gives a damn about our border. Oh, a few people raise their hands and say, well, this is bad, that's unfortunate. No one seems to care about the rule of law. So they said, would you come in and be the CEO and try to be a spokesman for the people in the United States who feel disenfranchised? And our numbers are growing rapidly. I think they're going to grow a lot more next year as people begin to figure out, why should I worry about who wins the election when everything stays the same? Who's really going to step forward with a new team and say, it's over, we're going to stop it? Who's going to really cut spending? It's impossible. You can't cut spending. We have to print more money. Well, the more you do, the more likely you are to fall apart. Everybody in the United States understands this, but now I see tens of thousands of people who are coming forward and want this to end. So there are a lot of other issues that we don't like. We don't like the sexualization of children. You know, we're tired of the human trafficking as well as the drugs that pour into our country. We're tired of criminals who are not tried and dealt with as harshly as possible. Everything's out of control. Our internally, we are crumbling, and everybody knows it. And that includes hundreds of thousands of veterans who are going to flock to our colors because they see nowhere else to go, and they're sick of it because many of them have suffered terribly. And the question is, for what? What did we achieve in Afghanistan? What did we achieve in Iraq? What did we achieve anywhere? Well, we all know the answer. Strategically, for us, nothing. But lots of people in Washington live at the top of the food chain. They're doing quite well. In the meantime, food is up 35%, and it's getting worse. People are having trouble putting food on the table. Not in Washington. No, not in the gated neighborhoods, not in Manhattan. You know, we're talking about the average American. This is not going to go on long. So this is what we're about. And we want to end these overseas conflicts. We want to defend the border. We want to expel the illegals. We want to restore the rule of law. But at the same time, we're getting a lot of inquiries from overseas. In fact, a number of people from the continent, India, are asking questions. Can we form a similar chapter? And I think that could happen at some point. And what we're doing now is we're benefiting from the investment that many people are making. We're trying to make it possible for people to join us without spending any money. The last thing we want to do is take money from Americans who need it.
That's extraordinarily powerful message, and I know about messaging. I feel there is, I don't know, an overlap perhaps with Mr. Carlson, Tucker Carlson, who is also an extremely powerful exponent of the kind of counsel of despair at the political class in Washington. Have you thought about joining up together, you and Tucker?
Well, he's been very supportive of us to this point, but we really have spent the last several months building up a new platform. We're going to build a media platform, and we're trying to build membership. We put those together, and our members will then get fact-based news and information. We're also sick to death of the mainstream media. We don't need opinion-based news. What we need to know is what's really happening. You know, stop lying to us about losses. Stop lying to us about the health of our economy. Stop lying to us about criminality. Stop lying to us about the border. We're not stupid. We know we're being lied to. So we're trying to put together something that will stream routinely real fact-based news. And you know that sounds easy. It's not. Because when you go on the internet, it's very tough to sort truth from fiction. And occasionally we all make mistakes. But we got to try it, and I think we're going to be successful. But it's going to take time. The more money that comes in, the sooner we go further. And we're going to get a lot of good people too to come on board with this that are going to help with the news part. We've got a lot of writers that are coming in, helping to take information, turn it into bites of say 500 to 800 words that people can understand. But we're at the beginning. Mr. Galloway, we're just starting. And I think this could be something that a lot of people in a lot of countries would appreciate.
Could well be. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thanks as always for being on the mother of all talk shows.